Hello and welcome to October's book review. We're filming this kind of early, so there is a book I'm reading at the moment that I probably will finish by the end of October, but just the way my upload schedule works, I have to film this now so that it's ready for you. So that book will just go into November, and we might have slightly more to cover in November than we do this month. With the books that I've read, I tried to make it a little spookier, a little darker, a little more fantastical, is that a word? Because, you know, October, Halloween, all of that. Try and stick with the seasons. But yeah, so there's 3 books that we're going to cover today, and we might as well just get on with the first one. So the first book I read was The Binding, and that is by Bridget Collins. And the concept of this book is that essentially books are people's real life feelings and events that have happened, and bookbinders take bad things away from people. So as they're binding their story into, or that event into a book, the person who they're binding from forgets it. So any time something like any heartbreak or anything like that, anything even worse than that, can be bound into a book, and then the books aren't supposed to be sold and shared. They just go into a vault under lock and key and stuff like that. So books are kind of not allowed-ish in this society. I'm assuming this is based in sort of medievally kind of, not medieval, that's too early, sort of Victorian but slightly before, I would have guessed, but it never actually says where it's set or when it's set. But it's kind of fun reading a book when they keep telling you that books are bad and uncommon and shouldn't be read. It makes you feel a bit naughty, so that was fun. I liked that. But it did make me think, does that mean there are no happy books? If books are all people's memories that they want to forget so that they can lead happy and comfortable and joyful lives, does that mean all books are just miserable? Because as a reader and as a book lover, that would be rubbish, wouldn't it? I mean, I get it. But yeah, I did wonder, are there no happy books? So the book is split into 3 parts. Parts 1 and 2 are narrated by Emmett, and then part 3 all of a sudden changes its narrator without any obvious denotation of this. All of a sudden you go, this is not the same person, is it? And you have to really, really figure it out that part 3 has suddenly changed narrator, which would have been fine. I think if she was going to do that, and she did do that, I would have preferred it to be like 4 parts, and then 2 parts were Emmett and 2 parts were the other dude. I think that would have sat better with me rather than having like 3/4 of the book with one voice and then all of a sudden a different voice. It made it sit a bit weirdly for me. Part 2 was my favourite part. It was a sort of flashback of Emmett's life before he became a bookbinder, and I really enjoyed that. As a standalone story, I liked it a lot. I read that bit much quicker than the other 2 parts. And to be quite honest, I was a little disappointed with The Binding. Reading the blurb, I thought there'd be way more about the bindings of books, of people's memories. I thought we'd find out a lot more about that process and about the people that go and how that affects bookbinders and X, Y and Z. So what's on the blurb seems to imply that, but what's in the book doesn't seem to match the blurb. Don't get me wrong, it's an interesting concept, it's an interesting read. I was just expecting something entirely different to what was in this book, and that's why I was slightly disappointed buy it, I would guess. But it was well written, and it certainly set October's sort of dark undertones and mystical concepts well. That was The Binding by Bridget Collins. Book 2, I'm very late to the game on this one, but it's The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. This is my brother's copy. It had to go, so my brother read it, it then went to my mum for her to read it, and then it came to me, but obviously with lockdowns and stuff, I got this considerably later than I would have if the year was normal, but that doesn't matter. And I was really surprised how much I enjoyed this book. I thought this was really good. It's obviously like the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, but it's nothing like The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale is narrated by one handmaid, Offred. It's very claustrophobic, it's very, I mean, it's grim. It's a grim book, isn't it? Anyone that's read The Handmaid's Tale has got to agree that it's not that fun. Whereas The Testaments has 3 narrators. This one is clearly noted, which I like. One of which has grown up in Gilead their whole life and doesn't see it as this oppressive place, particularly if you're female. One of them is outside of Gilead and shows the perception of the place from outside. She's in Canada, so sort of borders. And then the other one is Aunt Lydia. I can say it now because this book has been out for over a year, so I'm not going to be spoiling it by saying that the third one is Aunt Lydia. I thought about saying a prominent aunt, and then I thought, nah, we're just going to say it's Aunt Lydia. And that, loved it. Loved hearing Aunt Lydia's story. That made it for me, I think. Because in Handmaid's Tale, oh, there goes Jeff. Aunt Lydia comes across really, really badly. So actually finding out her story was so good. As I mentioned, Handmaid's Tale, that book angered me a lot. A lot. The fact that women just can't do so many things. So many normal things like shop signs with just pictures because they're not allowed to read. Things like that just really, really got my goat. And this does have some of it, and there were bits that did annoy me, particularly when you're reading it from the perspective of the girl who grew up in Gilead, but it's not quite so anger inspiring. Don't know where that phrase came from, but like obviously the way they treat women, I mean the way they treat most people there, but in particular women, does annoy me greatly, but it's not quite so bad in this one. So I think I've mentioned this in a few book reviews back, possibly when I reviewed Vox, which is somewhere behind me, that there are a lot of these kind of books, those sort of women are repressed, but my word, Margaret Atwood just does it so much better than all of them. So much better. If you're only going to read one author that does that kind of book, go for Margaret Atwood. She is the Don of repressed women, which probably isn't a title that she wants. Sorry, Margaret. As always, I appreciated the fact that the chapters were short. I find that does make reading a book easier than wading through chapters of like 40 pages. And I could have done without the academic meet-up conference thing that they've written at the end of it, but whatever floats your boat. That one for me personally wasn't my fave. Not a huge fan of a hardback book, as we know. I do find it harder to read, but I do very much appreciate the end papers because they're an optical illusion. It looks like it's just one person, but it's not. It's these two, but in one picture. It's like a rabbit or duck. So yeah, did appreciate the end papers of this book, but by far my favourite book of this month. Very high up there for my books of the year. I just really enjoyed it, and I was kind of surprised that I enjoyed it quite as much as I did, and that's The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. And the last book I read doesn't have an author, but it's Hocus Pocus and the all-new sequel. Hocus Pocus is by far my favourite Halloween film. I don't do horror films, scary films, because I wouldn't sleep for a month. I am very much a wimp. I don't do haunted houses. I did the little one at Madame Tussauds once and ended up crying. So I don't do that. I'm not very good at people making me jump or scared. So Halloween is not my favourite season, it has to be said. I know that is blasphemous to a number of people, but Hocus Pocus, by far the best Halloween film. It is my level of scariness. And when I found out that there was a sequel to it, I really, really wanted to read it. But I have also heard, or had also heard, that it's really quite bad. But my brother actually bought this for me for Christmas, so he sort of gave me that little nudge to actually go and read it. Obviously it's split into two parts because it's got the retelling of the film as part one. It's relatively short in comparison. I mean, this is a reasonably chunky book, but part one is about 200 odd pages, maybe a few more, and that's a retelling of Hocus Pocus, which I know very well. But I did like the fact that for the first half of it they alternated between 18, oh what was it, 18, where are you? Oh sorry, 1693 and the 90s, modern day. It's not modern day now for us, but it was modern day when this came out, so the 90s. And I liked that a lot. I felt like you got to see more of Binks's story because of that. And obviously the book being written, you got to hear the internal monologue more of the Denisons and Alison as well, which I liked a lot. I mean, as I say, I love Hocus Pocus. I'm biased on that part. So largely we need to talk about the sequel, because the sequel is the things that people don't know about. It wasn't as bad as I've seen the reviews make it out as, but it is quite a carbon copy of Hocus Pocus, it has to be said. There's lots of scrapes, you think they've done it and then they haven't. There's a love story, there's a talking animal. There are a lot of elements that are the same. But that being said, it does have some of my favourite lines. I did laugh out loud a few times at the Sanderson sisters' confusion over mobile phones. That was funny. But my absolute favourite, and it might be a little bit of a spoiler, but he doesn't play a huge part in the book. But they go to the graveyard. There's 3 kids. One of them is Max and Alison's daughter. They're 16, 17, something like that in the book. So it's Max and Alison's daughter and her 2 friends, who are sort of the trio that help get the witches. But they're in the graveyard and Thackeray Binks's ghost comes out and says, "Ah, Poppy Denison, we take it Max is no longer a virgin then." And I laughed a lot at that line. I was like, that is genius. Well done, whoever actually wrote this, because you haven't put your name to your work. A few other bits that I wasn't quite so sure on though. The professions of the adults that are in Hocus Pocus. Max Denison is a teacher. Wasn't entirely sure by that one, but the one that was even worse was Jay, who's one of the bullies. in Hocus Pocus, he ends up being the head teacher. So that didn't really make sense in my head. And Winnie Sanderson, or Winifred, didn't feel quite right in the sequel. She had a lot of insults that seemed a bit twee for what I would have expected from her. But yeah, it did end on a really annoying cliffhanger though. They have left it open for more further work. So yeah, that was Hocus Pocus and the sequel. I enjoyed it a lot, but people are right, it is a little disappointing. So if you can find it somewhere reasonably cheap, I would recommend reading it. But if you're going to pay the earth to get a copy of this, maybe just find someone that you can borrow it off. Which I know doesn't sound like a glowing review, but it was okay. It was okay. It's how we do that. Can you hear Jeff growling? Or is it just me? So yeah, there we have it. There are the 3 books that I finished prior to recording this in October. As I say, I do have another book that I'm currently reading, which I probably will finish by the end of October, but upload schedules as they are doesn't quite work out. So you'll have to find out what I think of that one in November. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!